The crisp air of the Seattle shipyard bit at John's cheeks, but it was the icy stares of the other engineers that truly made him shiver. He adjusted the collar of his worn jacket, a futile attempt to hide the frayed edges that spoke of too many long nights and too little pay. John, a single father to his 8-year-old daughter Lily, was a relic in this gleaming new world of technology. A man who still believed in the feel of steel and the rumble of an engine. He was an old-school mechanical engineer in a world of computer simulations. Today was the day of the launch. The Aegis, a $500 million cargo vessel, was about to be christened. It was a marvel of modern engineering, and John had a small, almost forgotten role in its construction. He had been relegated to a supervisor position, his suggestions often met with condescending smiles or outright dismissal by the younger, more innovative team members. They saw his meticulous nature as a weakness, a sign of a man stuck in the past. "Look at him," whispered a sharp-suited engineer named Mark, loud enough for a few people to hear. "Still wearing that old jacket. You'd think with all the hours he's put in, he could afford a new one." A snicker rippled through the group. John's face flushed, but he said nothing. He had bigger things to worry about. The last few weeks had been a blur of late nights and early mornings, trying to make ends meet after Lily's medical bills for her asthma flare-ups had stacked up. He'd sold his old pickup truck just to keep the lights on and buy her the nebulizer she needed. The thought of Lily, her bright smile and endless questions, was the only thing that kept him going. He had a duty to her, a responsibility that outweighed the mockery of men who had no idea what it meant to struggle. As the shipyard bustled with activity, a sense of unease settled over John. It was a familiar feeling, a gut instinct honed over years of working with heavy machinery. He moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning the massive vessel. The Aegis was a beautiful beast, but something wasn't right. The tension in the air felt wrong. He walked past the massive launch cradle, his hands running over the cold metal. He noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible misalignment in one of the hydraulic pistons that was part of the final stage release system. It was a small detail, the kind a computer simulation would miss, the kind an experienced eye wouldn't. He looked at the pressure gauges and his blood ran cold. The pressure was off, just slightly, but enough to cause a catastrophic failure. He knew what this meant. A failure in the launch cradle could cause the entire ship to lurch sideways, crashing into the shipyard's concrete pilings and twisting the hull into a mangled wreck. The ripple effect would be devastating, a chain reaction of destruction that could injure or even kill the dozens of workers still on the deck and in the surrounding area. And the company's financial future would be ruined. John hurried to the launch control booth, the cold dread in his stomach growing with every step. He needed to warn someone, but he knew what would happen. He'd be laughed at again, dismissed as a paranoid old man. He saw Mark in the booth, his finger hovering over the launch button, a smirk on his face as he talked into a radio. John burst in, his voice urgent and strained. "Stop! Don't launch it!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the tense silence of the booth. "The pressure in the cradle is wrong. The alignment is off. You'll have a catastrophic failure." Mark turned, his smirk twisting into a sneer. "What are you talking about, old man? The diagnostics are perfect. You're just trying to steal the spotlight." He gestured to the monitors. "See? All green. Everything's perfect." John shook his head vehemently. "The gauges are wrong. They're calibrated to a faulty baseline. I saw the piston. I felt it. The pressure is uneven. You'll shear the cradle. The ship will tip." The other engineers in the booth laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "He's lost it," one of them said. Another added, "Maybe his daughter's medical bills are getting to him." The words hit John like a physical blow, but he didn't waver. He thought of Lily, of her trust in him, and the fear in his gut solidified into a resolve of iron. He couldn't let his pride or the humiliation stop him from doing what was right. He had to be a hero, not for the headlines, but for the girl who called him Dad. The clock was ticking. The CEO of the shipyard, Mr. Thompson, a man known for his impatience and cold corporate demeanor, was on the main stage, a bottle of champagne poised to strike the hull. The crowd was cheering, the tension building for the grand moment. Inside the control booth, Mark was looking at John with a mixture of annoyance and disdain. "Get him out of here," Mark said, motioning to a security guard. "He's disrupting the ceremony. This is the biggest day of my career, and I'm not letting some washed-up old engineer ruin it." John held his ground, his hands clenching into fists. "Mark, listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. I've been doing this for 30 years. I can feel the flaw in the system. Your computer models are a great tool, but they're only as good as the data they're given. The physical system is showing a different story." Mark's face was red with fury. He stepped forward, pushing John back slightly. "You're a fool. I designed this system. It's flawless. The launch is happening. Now get out." The security guard, a burly man with an impassive face, grabbed John by the arm. John struggled, but the guard's grip was firm. He looked out the window of the booth, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He could see the ship, a monument of steel and ambition, ready to glide into the water. He could see the men and women on the deck, unaware of the potential disaster lurking beneath them. He saw the crane operators, the ground crew, the camera crews filming the event. He saw all the people who were about to be caught in a maelstrom of metal and water. A thought flashed through his mind, a risky, desperate gamble. He had to get to the main power switch for the hydraulics. It was a manual override, a lever that would kill the power to the entire cradle system. It was located on the ground floor, just below the booth. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, John broke free from the guard's grasp. He shoved past Mark, who stumbled back in surprise, and sprinted out of the booth and down the metal stairs. The security guard was right behind him, his footsteps heavy and loud. As John ran, the shouts from the control booth echoed behind him. "Stop him!" Mark's voice boomed over the intercom. "He's trying to sabotage the launch!" The accusation sent a wave of panic through the crowd on the ground. People turned, pointing. John, a small figure running towards the base of the massive ship, was now the center of attention. He heard the security guard closing in, his breathing heavy. John's own lungs were burning, but the image of Lily's face was a fire in his veins, pushing him forward. He couldn't let this happen. He wouldn't. He reached the base of the cradle, a massive steel structure that held the ship. He could see the hydraulic pistons and his heart sank. The telltale sign of an uneven load was there, a slight, almost invisible tremor. The pressure was building, the system fighting to hold the immense weight evenly. He knew he was right. The computer was lying. He found the manual override panel, a heavy metal box bolted to a concrete pylon. He fumbled with the latch, his hands shaking with a mix of exhaustion and urgency. He heard the security guard right behind him, a hand reaching out to grab his shoulder. In that moment, a surprising voice cut through the chaos. "Leave him be!" A voice boomed over the shipyard's PA system. It was Mr. Thompson, the CEO. He had seen the commotion and, intrigued, had asked for a closer look. John pulled the heavy lever. There was a loud whooshing sound as the hydraulic pressure was released from the system. A moment later, there was a deafening groan of tortured metal, followed by the sound of something snapping. A small part of the cradle, a reinforced steel support beam, gave way under the uneven pressure. If John hadn't pulled that lever, if he had been even a second later, the entire cradle would have buckled, sending the Aegis careening to disaster. Silence fell over the shipyard. The sound of the snapping beam was a stark, chilling exclamation point on John's frantic warning. The CEO and the crowd watched, stunned, as John, gasping for breath, stood over the manual override, his head bowed, the weight of what had nearly happened finally sinking in. The stunned silence of the crowd was eventually broken by a wave of murmurs, then hushed whispers. The security guard, who had been about to tackle John, now stood frozen, his hand still outstretched. The CEO, Mr. Thompson, descended from the stage, his face no longer one of cold impatience, but of sober shock. He walked past the quiet engineers from the control booth, their faces pale with a mix of terror and disbelief. Mark, who had been so sure of his calculations, now looked like a ghost, his bravado completely shattered. He had been a hair's breadth away from a career-ending, company-ruining disaster. Mr. Thompson stopped in front of John, who was still trying to catch his breath. The old engineer looked up, his eyes meeting the CEO's. There was no defiance in John's gaze, only a deep, weary relief. He had done his job. He had saved the ship, and more importantly, the people around it. "What happened?" the CEO asked, his voice low and serious. John, his voice still hoarse, explained the misalignment, the faulty pressure gauge, and the computer simulation's fatal error. He spoke with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his craft inside and out. He didn't gloat, he didn't accuse. He simply stated the facts. He explained how the computer, relying on flawed data from a poorly calibrated sensor, had registered a green light, while the physical strain on the system was on the verge of breaking point. Mr. Thompson listened intently, his gaze moving from John to the damaged section of the cradle. He saw the snapped beam and the subtle but undeniable signs of a hydraulic system that had been under immense stress. He turned to the engineers from the control booth, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "You relied on a screen," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. He relied on his hands, his eyes, and his experience. He trusted his gut, and he saved a $500 million ship. He saved lives. Mark, unable to meet the CEO's eyes, stammered out a weak apology. But Mr. Thompson wasn't listening. His attention was solely on John. "Thank you, John," he said, his voice now filled with a newfound respect. "You were right, and you did the right thing. You're a hero." The word felt strange on John's ears. He wasn't a hero. He was a father who had been doing his job, a father who just wanted to get home to his daughter. The news of John's heroic action spread like wildfire. The story of the single father, mocked and dismissed, who saved a multi-million-dollar ship from disaster, became a national headline. The company, in a move to save face and show their appreciation, not only promoted John to a senior position with a substantial raise, but also took care of all of Lily's medical bills. Weeks later, a new launch was scheduled. John, no longer in his worn jacket, but in a brand-new company-issued one, stood by the launch cradle supervising the final checks. The new team of engineers, including a humbled Mark, listened to his every word with rapt attention. They were no longer seeing a relic of the past, but a master of his craft. As the Aegis slid gracefully into the water, a flawless launch this time, the crowd cheered. But John wasn't watching the ship. He was on a video call, holding his phone up to the launch, his daughter Lily on the other end, her face alight with excitement. "Daddy, you did it! It's so big!" she said, her small voice full of pride. John smiled, a genuine, relieved smile that reached his eyes. "We did it, sweetheart. We did it together." He looked around at the bustling shipyard, the sun glinting off the water, and he felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. The mockery, the struggles, the late nights, it had all led to this moment. Not to a headline or a promotion, but to the simple, profound joy of knowing he could provide for his daughter and, in the process, prove that true wisdom is often found not in the glow of a screen, but in the steady hands of a person who understands the heart of the machine. He was a hero to his company, but more importantly, he was still the hero to his little girl. and that was all that truly mattered.